Have you ever wondered what we can learn from the most disturbing stories in the Bible? Some of these narratives, while difficult to read, hold profound lessons for us today. One of the darkest accounts can be found in Judges 19-21. This story confronts us with themes of moral decay, leadership failure, and the cascading effects of poor decisions. It's not just a tale of tragedy but also one of reflection and redemption. Together, we'll delve deep into this narrative, unpacking its lessons and understanding how it resonates in our modern lives. Stay with me to uncover powerful insights that will change the way you view leadership, decision-making, and our responsibility toward others. Let's explore this together. The book of Judges is set in a time when Israel had no centralized leadership. Each tribe functioned independently, guided by their own moral compasses. The phrase, "In those days, there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in their own eyes," epitomizes the period. This lack of unity and direction allowed moral and social decay to take root. Without a king, there was no accountability, and the absence of spiritual leadership led to widespread chaos. The social fabric of the time was heavily influenced by tribal allegiances. Communities often acted out of self-interest, prioritizing tribal honor over collective well-being. The Levite, central to this story, represents a fragmented society where even religious figures fail to uphold divine principles. His role reflects the broader cultural and spiritual decline. This was also an era of extreme patriarchy. Women had little to no autonomy, often treated as property or bargaining tools. The treatment of the concubine in this narrative starkly highlights the devaluation of women and the resulting societal consequences. Such degradation speaks volumes about the moral erosion within Israel. Hospitality, a core value in ancient cultures, was also fading. The Levite's inability to find shelter among his own people underscores the breakdown of communal bonds. This neglect symbolizes a nation that had strayed far from its covenant with God. The lack of kindness and responsibility sets the stage for the tragic events that follow. The absence of divine guidance is evident throughout this story. The Israelites were meant to be a light to other nations, yet their actions mirrored those of the corrupt societies around them. This dissonance between their calling and their conduct serves as a warning about the dangers of spiritual drift. The historical backdrop of this narrative is one of transition and uncertainty. The period of the Judges bridges the time between Joshua's leadership and the establishment of monarchy. It was a time when the people were searching for identity and structure, often falling into idolatry and disobedience. This story is a microcosm of that larger struggle. Understanding the context is crucial to grasping the depth of this story. It's more than a tale of human failure, it's a reflection of what happens when divine principles are abandoned. The events of Judges 19-21 are not isolated incidents but symptoms of a society in moral freefall. The story begins with the Levite, a man of religious standing, taking a concubine from Bethlehem. This relationship already reflects a societal compromise, as concubinage was a practice tolerated but not ideal in Israel. The concubine, after some time, leaves the Levite and returns to her father's house, indicating possible tension or dissatisfaction. This initial act of separation introduces themes of relational breakdown and personal conflict. After 4 months, the Levite decides to retrieve the concubine. His journey to her father's house and the warm reception he receives symbolize a fleeting moment of hospitality and reconciliation. However, the father-in-law's insistence on delaying their departure reveals a subtle hesitation, possibly hinting at unease about the Levite's intentions or the journey ahead. This interaction highlights the cultural norms of the time, where hospitality was a valued practice. The father-in-law's gestures of kindness contrast starkly with the events that unfold later. It also reflects the patriarchal system, where the father plays a central role in mediating relationships. Even as the concubine's voice remains absent, the Levite's eventual decision to leave, despite repeated requests to stay longer, demonstrates a determination that borders on impatience. His insistence on traveling late in the day, against better judgment, sets the stage for the tragedy that follows. This decision, though seemingly minor, underscores how small choices can have far-reaching consequences. The concubine's role in this narrative is one of silence and passivity. Her perspective is never presented, emphasizing the dehumanization she experiences. This lack of agency not only reflects her societal position but also foreshadows her ultimate fate. This part of the story raises critical questions about responsibility and leadership. The Levite, as a spiritual figure, fails to act with the care and foresight expected of him. His decisions reveal a deeper moral failing, mirroring the larger issues within Israel. The journey back north is not just a physical trip but a symbolic descent into moral chaos. It represents a society traveling further from its covenant with God, moving from reconciliation to catastrophe. This sets the tone for the horrific events that will soon unfold. The Levite, his concubine, and a servant stop in Gibeah, a city of the tribe of Benjamin. Despite being among Israelites, they find no hospitality, an act that violates the cultural expectations of the time. This neglect symbolizes the brokenness of communal and spiritual life within Israel. As they wait in the town square, an elderly man finally offers them shelter. His act of kindness contrasts with the cold reception from the rest of the city. However, his hospitality becomes tainted by the events that follow, raising questions about the limits of morality and responsibility. That night, the house is surrounded by men from the city demanding to assault the Levite. Their actions mirror the infamous sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, drawing a parallel between Israel and the wicked nations they were meant to displace. This comparison underscores the depth of Israel's moral decay. The host attempts to protect his guest by offering his daughter and the concubine instead. This shocking act reflects a distorted sense of duty, where the preservation of male honor outweighs the dignity and safety of women. It is a brutal reminder of the devaluation of women in this society. The Levite, in an act of desperation or cowardice, hands over the concubine to the mob. Her suffering throughout the night and subsequent death highlight the devastating consequences of moral compromise and societal failure. Her silence throughout this ordeal amplifies the tragedy of her dehumanization. The events in Gibeah are not isolated but represent the broader state of Israel. The lack of hospitality, justice, and compassion reveals a nation far removed from its calling to be a light among nations. This part of the story challenges readers to reflect on the consequences of collective moral failure. By morning, the concubine lies at the threshold of the house, a powerful symbol of the cost of neglect and abuse. Her death marks a turning point in the narrative, setting in motion a chain of events that will impact the entire nation. The Levite's response to the concubine's death is as shocking as the events that preceded it. Instead of mourning or seeking justice through established means, he dismembers her body and sends the pieces to the tribes of Israel. This grotesque act is intended to provoke outrage and demand action. The dismemberment is symbolic, reflecting the fragmented state of Israel. Each tribe receives a part, a physical representation of the nation's moral and spiritual disintegration. This act forces the tribes to confront the atrocity and decide how to respond. The Levite's actions raise questions about his motivations. Was this an act of justice, vengeance, or self-preservation? By framing the narrative around the concubine's death, he deflects attention from his own culpability, portraying himself as a victim rather than a participant in her suffering. This act serves as a call to unity among the tribes. The outrage it generates highlights a shared sense of responsibility, even as it exposes deep divisions within the nation. The tribe's collective response will shape the trajectory of the story. The Levite's failure to acknowledge his role in the tragedy reflects a broader issue of accountability. His actions demonstrate how those in positions of power can manipulate narratives to suit their agendas, avoiding personal responsibility. The sending of the body parts is both shocking and effective. It captures the attention of the entire nation, forcing them to confront the horrors that have taken place. This act, though gruesome, underscores the urgency of addressing the moral decay within Israel. This moment in the narrative is a turning point, shifting the focus from individual actions to collective responsibility. It sets the stage for the tribe's assembly and the decisions that will follow, highlighting the interconnectedness of justice, leadership, and community. The tribes of Israel respond to the Levite's call, assembling to address the atrocity. This gathering is a rare moment of unity, as the tribes come together with a shared purpose. However, this unity is fragile, built on outrage rather than true reconciliation. The assembly reflects the seriousness of the situation. The tribes recognize that the events in Gibeah are not just a local issue but a national crisis. This acknowledgement marks a critical step in addressing the underlying issues within Israel. The Levite recounts his version of the events, framing himself as a victim and emphasizing the wickedness of the Benjaminites. His account, however, omits his own role in the tragedy, shifting blame entirely onto others. This selective retelling highlights the complexities of justice and truth. The tribes demand that the Benjaminites hand over the guilty men from Gibeah. This request is a test of national solidarity and justice. However, the tribe of Benjamin refuses, choosing loyalty to their own over accountability. This decision escalates the conflict. The refusal of Benjamin reveals the dangers of tribalism and misplaced loyalty. By prioritizing their own members over justice, they perpetuate the cycle of sin and violence. This choice will have devastating consequences for the entire nation. The assembly's decision to go to war reflects both their outrage and their failure to seek a peaceful resolution. This response underscores the difficulty of balancing justice with mercy, a tension that runs throughout the narrative. This gathering highlights the complexities of collective decision-making. While the tribes unite against a common enemy, their actions are driven by anger rather than wisdom, setting the stage for further tragedy. The civil war between the tribe of Benjamin and the rest of Israel is one of the darkest chapters in the Bible. The conflict begins with a sense of righteous indignation, as the tribes seek to punish the guilty. However, it quickly spirals into a devastating and costly war. The initial battles reveal the strength and resilience of the Benjaminites. Despite being outnumbered, they inflict heavy losses on the other tribes. This unexpected resistance prolongs the conflict and intensifies the sense of division within Israel. The war is characterized by brutal tactics and heavy casualties. Both sides suffer immense losses, highlighting the futility of violence as a means of resolving disputes. The scale of the destruction underscores the consequences of unchecked anger and tribal loyalty. The eventual defeat of Benjamin is devastating. The surviving 600 men flee, their numbers reduced to the brink of extinction. This near annihilation raises questions about the morality of collective punishment and the cost of pursuing justice without mercy. The war's aftermath leaves Israel deeply fractured. The loss of life and destruction of communities create lasting scars, both physically and spiritually. The conflict reflects the consequences of failing to address issues of justice and leadership before they escalate. This chapter of the story reveals the dangers of escalation and the difficulty of balancing justice with compassion. The tribe's actions, though intended to uphold righteousness, result in widespread suffering and regret. The civil war serves as a cautionary tale about the costs of division and the importance of seeking reconciliation. It challenges readers to consider how conflicts might be resolved more justly and peacefully. After the war, the tribes face a new dilemma: the near extinction of the tribe of Benjamin. This outcome, though a result of their actions, creates a moral and practical crisis. How can they ensure justice while preserving the integrity of the nation? The decision to preserve Benjamin reflects a recognition of shared identity and responsibility. Despite their anger, the tribes realize that the loss of an entire tribe would be a tragedy for Israel as a whole. This moment marks a shift from vengeance to restoration. To solve this problem, the tribes devise controversial solutions. They attack a non-participating clan to provide wives for the surviving Benjaminites, an act that raises ethical questions. This decision underscores the complexity of balancing justice, mercy, and survival. The second solution, allowing the Benjaminites to abduct women during a festival, reflects the deep moral compromises of the time. While it technically avoids breaking their vow, it perpetuates the cycle of violence and exploitation. This act highlights the challenges of addressing past wrongs without creating new ones. These decisions reveal the tensions within Israel's leadership and the limits of human wisdom. The solutions, though practical, fail to fully address the underlying issues of justice and morality. This chapter challenges readers to reflect on the cost of compromise. The preservation of Benjamin is a bittersweet moment. While it ensures the survival of the tribe, it comes at a great cost, both morally and spiritually. This tension reflects the broader themes of the story, the consequences of sin and the need for redemption. This part of the narrative concludes the cycle of conflict and restoration. It leaves readers with lingering questions about the nature of justice, the cost of unity, and the possibility of healing after profound loss. Take a moment to reflect. Are you seeking truth, hope, and a deeper connection with God? Subscribe now to join this journey of faith and walk closer with Jesus every day. The story of Judges 19-21 emphasizes the dire consequences of leadership voids. The repeated phrase, "In those days, there was no king in Israel," reflects a nation adrift without direction. Leadership, both spiritual and political, was essential to maintaining unity and moral order, but its absence allowed corruption to spread unchecked. The Levite's actions also highlight the importance of personal accountability. As a religious figure, he was expected to embody godly principles, yet his decisions contributed to the tragedy. His failure to protect his concubine and his manipulation of the narrative reveal the devastating effects of neglecting responsibility. Leadership is not only about holding power but also about stewarding it wisely. The leaders of the tribes acted out of anger, making decisions that led to unnecessary destruction. This failure underscores the need for leaders who prioritize justice and mercy over vengeance and pride. The story challenges modern readers to consider their own roles as leaders in families, communities, and workplaces. Leadership involves making decisions that benefit others, even at personal cost. The Levite's selfishness stands in stark contrast to the sacrificial leadership modeled by biblical figures like Moses or Christ. Accountability extends beyond individual leaders to the collective. The tribe's failure to intervene earlier in the Levite's journey and the subsequent war reflect a shared responsibility for the nation's moral decay. True accountability requires both personal integrity and communal vigilance. The absence of a king points to Israel's ultimate need for divine leadership. This narrative foreshadows the establishment of monarchy and, later, the arrival of Christ as the perfect leader. It reminds us that human leadership, though flawed, is necessary to guide society in alignment with God's will. This part of the story resonates with contemporary struggles for ethical leadership. It challenges us to reflect on how we lead, whom we follow, and how we hold ourselves and others accountable for the decisions that shape our lives and communities. The concubine's treatment is one of the most striking elements of this story. Her voice is absent, and her life is used as a bargaining tool, reflecting the systemic devaluation of women in this historical context. Her tragic fate underscores the dangers of objectifying and dehumanizing others. The host's willingness to offer his daughter and the concubine to protect his male guest highlights the deeply ingrained patriarchal values of the time. This act reveals a distorted sense of hospitality, where preserving honor came at the expense of women's safety and dignity. The story challenges us to consider how societal norms can perpetuate injustice. The silence surrounding the concubine's suffering reflects a broader issue of neglect and complicity. Her death becomes a catalyst for action, but her life remains undervalued in the process. This narrative invites reflection on how we treat the marginalized and vulnerable in our own societies. Women, like the concubine, often face systemic inequalities that require both individual and collective action to address. The story calls us to advocate for the dignity and worth of every person. The concubine's role also serves as a stark warning about the consequences of neglecting God's command to love our neighbors as ourselves. Her suffering is not only a result of individual failures but also of a society that had lost sight of its divine calling. In the broader biblical context, this story contrasts with accounts where women play active, redemptive roles, such as Ruth or Esther. The silence of the concubine highlights what is lost when women's voices are silenced, and it challenges us to amplify those voices today. Ultimately, the concubine's story is a call to repentance and change. It reminds us that valuing every life is central to living out God's purposes and that justice begins with recognizing the image of God in every person. The events in Judges 19-21 are a vivid portrayal of moral decline. The initial acts of neglect and abuse spiral into a national crisis, demonstrating how unchecked sin can lead to widespread suffering. The story is a sobering reminder of the consequences of drifting away from God. The Levite's journey is marked by small but significant failures. From neglecting his concubine to ignoring the warnings of his father-in-law, each decision reflects a disregard for wisdom and compassion. These choices set the stage for the greater tragedy. The community's response, or lack thereof, further illustrates the effects of moral decay. Hospitality, once a sacred duty, is ignored, and justice is replaced by personal vendettas. The collective failure to act responsibly mirrors the Levite's individual shortcomings. This narrative challenges readers to consider their own responses to moral challenges. Do we remain silent in the face of injustice, or do we take action to address it? The story calls for a commitment to righteousness in both personal and communal spheres. The decline in Israel's morality is linked to their distance from God. The recurring cycle of disobedience in Judges reflects a deeper spiritual crisis. The farther Israel drifted from their covenant, the more vulnerable they became to sin and its consequences. This chapter also highlights the interconnectedness of sin. One act of neglect leads to another, creating a chain reaction of violence and destruction. It reminds us that our choices, whether good or bad, have ripple effects far beyond what we can see. Moral decline is not inevitable, but it requires intentional effort to resist. This story serves as both a warning and a call to action, urging readers to pursue lives of integrity, compassion, and faithfulness to God's principles. The civil war that follows the events in Gibeah represents the cost of collective failure. The tribe's inability to address injustice peacefully results in devastating consequences for the entire nation. This conflict underscores the importance of unity and the dangers of division. The refusal of the tribe of Benjamin to hand over the guilty parties reflects misplaced loyalty. Their decision to protect their own at the expense of justice escalates the situation into a full-scale war. This act of defiance illustrates how pride and stubbornness can lead to destruction. The other tribe's response, while justified, is also flawed. Their reliance on violence rather than reconciliation demonstrates a failure to seek God's guidance. This approach results in unnecessary loss of life and deepens the fractures within Israel. This part of the story challenges us to consider how we respond to conflict in our own lives. Are we quick to seek revenge, or do we strive for resolution and understanding? The tribe's actions serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of acting in anger. The war also reveals the fragility of human alliances. The tribes unite against Benjamin, but their unity is temporary and fueled by outrage. True unity requires a shared commitment to justice and mercy, not just a common enemy. The aftermath of the war leaves Israel in a state of mourning and regret. The loss of life and the near destruction of Benjamin highlight the cost of failing to address issues before they escalate. This serves as a reminder of the importance of proactive and compassionate leadership. Collective failure is not just about individual choices but also about the systems and structures that allow injustice to persist. This story calls for both personal and systemic change, challenging us to build communities rooted in love, justice, and accountability. Despite the devastation caused by the events in Judges 19-21, the story ends with a glimmer of hope. The preservation of the tribe of Benjamin reflects God's grace, even in the midst of human failure. This act of restoration is a powerful reminder of God's faithfulness. The Israelites' decision to preserve Benjamin, though flawed in execution, reflects an understanding of their shared identity. This moment of unity, however brief, demonstrates the potential for reconciliation even after great conflict. God's grace is evident in the survival of Benjamin. Despite their sins, they are given a chance to rebuild and continue their lineage. This act of mercy underscores the redemptive nature of God's character. Even in the face of judgment, the story challenges us to consider how we can extend grace to others. Just as God shows mercy to Israel, we are called to forgive and restore those who have fallen, reflecting His love and compassion in our actions. This narrative also foreshadows the ultimate act of grace in the New Testament. The brokenness of Israel points to humanity's need for a Savior, and the story of Benjamin's restoration mirrors the redemption offered through Christ. God's grace does not negate the consequences of sin but provides a way forward. The survival of Benjamin is a testament to God's ability to bring healing and renewal, even in the darkest circumstances. The story concludes with a reminder of the importance of living in alignment with God's will. His grace is not a license to continue in sin but an invitation to return to Him and live according to His purposes. The events in Judges 19-21 emphasize the delicate balance between justice and mercy. The tribe's decision to seek retribution against Benjamin reflects a desire for justice, but their methods reveal a lack of compassion and wisdom. This imbalance leads to devastating consequences for the entire nation. Justice is a foundational principle in the Bible, rooted in God's character. However, human interpretations of justice are often flawed, as seen in this story. The tribe's response to the atrocity in Gibeah is fueled by anger rather than a desire to restore righteousness, leading to unnecessary destruction. Mercy, on the other hand, is a reflection of God's grace and compassion. The Israelites show mercy only after the near annihilation of Benjamin, realizing the gravity of their actions too late. This delay highlights the importance of integrating mercy into justice from the outset. This story challenges readers to consider how they balance justice and mercy in their own lives. Do we rush to punish others without seeking understanding, or do we strive for resolutions that restore relationships and promote healing? True justice is not about retribution but about restoration. The tension between justice and mercy is a recurring theme in the Bible. From the laws given in the Old Testament to Jesus' teachings in the New Testament, we see a call to uphold justice while extending mercy. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of this balance. In the broader biblical narrative, the need for both justice and mercy points to the cross. Jesus' sacrifice is the ultimate expression of justice fulfilled and mercy extended. This story foreshadows the reconciliation made possible through Christ's work on our behalf. By reflecting on the events in Judges 19-21, we are reminded that justice and mercy must go hand in hand. Without mercy, justice becomes harsh and unforgiving. Without justice, mercy lacks accountability. Together, they reflect the heart of God's character and His desire for us to live in harmony. The near destruction of the tribe of Benjamin presents a challenge for the broader Israelite community: how to rebuild after such profound conflict. This moment highlights the importance of collective responsibility and the role of community in healing and restoration. The tribe's decision to preserve Benjamin reflects an acknowledgement of their shared identity. Despite their earlier actions, they recognized that the loss of an entire tribe would weaken the nation as a whole. This unity, though imperfect, is a step toward reconciliation. Rebuilding Benjamin required both practical and spiritual efforts. The provision of wives, though controversial, demonstrates a commitment to ensuring the tribe's survival. This act, while flawed, underscores the necessity of addressing both immediate needs and long-term recovery. The story challenges readers to consider their own roles in community restoration. How can we support those who have fallen or suffered? Rebuilding requires empathy, patience, and a willingness to work together toward a common goal. True restoration goes beyond physical rebuilding. It involves addressing the root causes of conflict and ensuring that justice, mercy, and accountability are upheld. The story of Benjamin reminds us that healing is a process that requires intentional effort. The role of community in this narrative also reflects God's design for His people. Throughout Scripture, we see a call to live in unity, supporting one another and reflecting His love. The events in Judges serve as a reminder of the importance of this calling. Ultimately, the preservation of Benjamin is a testament to the power of community. Even after devastating conflict, unity and cooperation can pave the way for renewal. This story challenges us to prioritize reconciliation and work toward restoring broken relationships in our own lives. The story of Judges 19-21 is more than an ancient account of tragedy and conflict. It is a timeless reminder of the consequences of moral failure, the importance of leadership, and the need for justice and mercy. Its lessons are as relevant today as they were in biblical times. One of the central takeaways is the importance of accountability. The Levite's failure to protect his concubine and the tribe's failure to act justly highlight the dangers of neglecting responsibility. In our own lives, we are called to be accountable for our actions and their impact on others. Another key lesson is the value of leadership. The absence of a king in Israel symbolizes the chaos that ensues when there is no guidance or direction. This story challenges us to seek and support leaders who prioritize righteousness, compassion, and integrity. The narrative also emphasizes the ripple effects of our choices. The small decisions made by the Levite, the host, and the tribes had far-reaching consequences, leading to national conflict and suffering. This serves as a reminder to consider the long-term impact of our actions. The story's focus on justice and mercy speaks to the heart of God's character. It challenges us to reflect these qualities in our own lives, striving for fairness while extending compassion to others. Balancing these principles is essential for fostering peace and reconciliation. The preservation of Benjamin highlights the importance of community and collective effort. Even in the aftermath of conflict, there is hope for restoration when we work together toward healing. This lesson is especially relevant in a world often marked by division and strife. Finally, the story points us to God's grace. Despite the failures of the Levite, the host, and the tribes, God's mercy is evident in the preservation of Benjamin and the ultimate redemption offered through Christ. This grace is a source of hope and inspiration for all who seek to live according to His will. As we reflect on this story, we are reminded of the weight of our decisions and the importance of living in alignment with God's principles. May this narrative inspire us to pursue justice, extend mercy, and seek restoration in all areas of our lives. As we conclude this journey through one of the most challenging and thought-provoking stories in the Bible, let us take a moment to reflect. The narrative in Judges 19-21 is not just a tale of tragedy, it's a mirror held up to humanity. It reveals the consequences of moral failure, the cost of neglecting justice, and the transformative power of mercy and grace. Each of us is called to examine our own lives, our decisions, and the way we lead and care for others. This story challenges us to rise above our flaws, seek reconciliation, and live in alignment with God's principles. If this message resonated with you, take a step toward deepening your faith. Subscribe to this channel and follow Jesus. He is the ultimate leader, the source of justice, and the embodiment of mercy. By walking with Him, we find the strength to make better decisions, the courage to extend forgiveness, and the grace to rebuild what is broken. Before we go, let me introduce myself. My name is Josue, and it is my joy and privilege to share these powerful truths with you. I want you to know that this channel is more than just a platform, it's a community. Together, we are growing, learning, and supporting one another on this journey of faith. So, as we part ways today, remember this: you are not alone. Whatever challenges you face, whatever questions weigh on your heart, God's grace is sufficient, and His love is unending. If you found value in this message, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and join this community of believers. Let's walk together as we follow Jesus and seek to live out His purpose for our lives. Thank you for spending this time with me. May God bless you, guide you, and fill your heart with His peace. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care, stay strong in your faith, and remember that every step you take toward God is a step toward healing and restoration. Subscribe now, and let's continue this journey together. See you next time, and God bless.